you a thrill. And now I've come across, you can't complain about the cost. You shouldn't call a doctor if you can't afford the pills.
Dr. Feelgood are a pub rock band from Canvey Island in Essex, or at least that's where their origins were, which was pretty close to London. They got into the pub circuit in London after they were formed in 1971. They were fronted by a guy called Lee Brillo, and the guitarist was definitely part of their initial sound was a guy called Wilco Johnson, who I've come across in other situations. Particularly he was with Ian Jury and the Blockheads. So they became popular in London, and were particularly known for the fact that they brought blues and R&B into their rock, unlike quite a few of the other kind of pub rock bands at that time. The recordings then made them more widely popular, and they're generally regarded as being part of the forerunners of punk in some ways, just with the kind of the immediacy of the music, but also with their clothing style, particularly using drainpipe trousers and stuff like that. In 1977, Wilco left. He didn't agree anymore with Brillo, and that's when, and a little bit after that, he went to the Blockheads. But Dr. Feelgood kept going. They nearly stopped in 1994 when Brillo died of cancer, but they still managed to keep going. They've kept changing members, and they are still going. They have created over the years 18 albums, but only 2 of them since the turn of the century. Hi, my name's Dan. How you doing today? I hope you're all right. So this was the second album by Dr. Feelgood, and it was my first encounter of it as an album. So I've not listened to it before. I do know of Dr. Feelgood. I know of some of their better known tracks, particularly Milk and Alcohol is one that was a hit in the 70s, and I remember it from then because I'm that old. So I would definitely describe this as pub rock, but I'm not necessarily sure that I could articulate exactly what that is and what that means. So let's just try and describe this as music then, in that case. So it's rocky stuff, but it's not the kind of big grandiose rock that you'd find from people like Led Zeppelin or even Queen or that sort of thing. It's definitely got a kind of down to earth and immediate feel to it. It's quite raw, but not as raw as I would describe garage as being, which sounds like it's just done badly recorded particularly. It's quite immediately accessible. It's got some of the elements definitely that came into punk and post-punk kind of coming in, just with the simplicity. And so it's not complicated. The recordings aren't complicated. And there's definitely here a huge blues and R&B influence. In fact, a lot of the tracks, if you could take the same track and you could record it with a band, and you would definitely say that's blues or R&B. And so, and it is in some ways, but it's not in other ways. So first of all, there's Brillo's voice. So it's a gravelly voice. That's not unusual for blues, I guess. But it's just the way that he sings has got an abruptness to it that definitely speaks more of East London and Essex than it does of the Mississippi Delta. And all the arrangements are quite sparse. The guitar's definitely a major part, and Wilco was apparently, quite instrumental. Yeah, good word. In terms of their popularity because of the way he played guitar. And the other thing is that, whereas you might describe blues as being predominantly laid back, this is kind of in some ways the opposite. So I guess that means that it leans forwards. It has this kind of intensity to it. It's got a kind of feeling of heavy-ishness to it as well, but I think that's mostly through the nature of the voice that's being used. So, okay, that's as much description as I'm going to try and do. I'm going to talk about some of the tracks. So some of the tracks are written by other people and that are presumably covers. Some of them are by Wilco, or some of them by Wilco and some others. Nick Lowe, who we've had some encounters with in this series already, makes an appearance as a co-writer on one of the tracks. So, picking out some individual tracks, Going Back Home reminds me quite a lot of the feel of Milk and Alcohol, which is a Dr. Feelgood song which came a bit later than this. Another Man reminds me of the theme tune to Minder, which is I Could Be So Good For You, which was sung by Dennis Waterman. Another similar things to that. There's a track which is fairly nicely written called Don't Let Your Daddy Know, but it feels badly sung. It sounds like he was having an off day that day. There's a cover track called Riot in Cell Block Number 9, which I recognise. So I've heard this before by other people. There's a track, Don't You Just Know It, which reminded me of some John Lee Hooker stuff, classic Chicago blues. But I might have heard this before by other people. And the last track on the album is called You Shouldn't Call the Doctor If You Can't Afford the Bills, which is written by Wilco. It's more rock and roll than blues, and I quite like it. It's a nice track. So overall, generally, I'd say it's okay. It's definitely quite distinctive, and as a thing in its own right. I found when I was trying to pick two tracks to have snippets of at the beginning and the end of the review, that I was it wasn't obvious which two tracks to use, and I think that's partly because there's a reasonable amount of variety through it, despite this kind of focus on blues and R&B. So that's a good point in its favour as well. So this is what I think. Please let me know what you think. So use the comments box to do that, and that's it from me for now.
On July 2nd, 1953, I was serving time for armed robbery. 4 o'clock in the morning, I was sleeping in my cell. I heard a whistle blow.